He had spent his life standing in courtrooms, judging right from wrong, cherishing every principle of the law as if it were a treasure. And yet tonight, he found himself sitting on the wrong side of the law. Judge Wesley Gaines. Once a symbol of justice in Birmingham, Alabama. Now, he was accused of stealing his own car. The charge was levied by a police officer who refused to admit his mistake. The grueling day was finally over. Wesley loosened his tie, slumping back in the leather seat of the Mercedes he had worked his entire life to earn. The breath left his chest slowly, as if to release the tension from a complicated case. A trial of a giant corporation with its own twisted tricks and blatant corruption. But he felt satisfied. Because it was justice. It was what he believed in, what he had lived and died for. The streets of Birmingham were strangely quiet at night. The yellow streetlights casting a long shadow on the sidewalk like a weary ghost. Wesley tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, waiting for the red light to turn green. That was when the siren tore through the night. Red-green lights flashed across the rearview mirror. He frowned. No speeding. No missed signs. What the hell was going on? He pulled the car over, doing everything he had always preached. Keeping his hands on the wheel, no hurry, no panic. A sharp knock sounded on the window. Wesley turned, his eyes meeting a cold, unfeeling gaze. An officer, female, white, in her mid-40s, blonde hair pulled back so tight that her skin was almost pulled tight. Her name was clearly visible on her badge, C. Doyle. No greeting. No explanation. There was only one voice, hard as stone. License and registration. Wesley nodded, slowly reaching for the glove compartment, every movement careful to the millimeter. He handed her the papers, but instead of examining them, she barely looked. Her eyes were fixed on him, his face, his suit, his fancy watch, then the car. "Is this yours?" she asked, her gaze suspicious, as if he had just stolen it from a parking lot. Wesley breathed softly through his nose. "Yes, officer." "Any problems?" She took a step back, her head tilted slightly, a gesture that was almost mocking. "So can you tell me where you got it?" His fingers curled, squeezing the steering wheel. He had heard this too many times. "This car is mine," he replied, calmly. "It's registered to me." But Officer Doyle wasn't listening. She had her hand on the radio. "I have a car. And I know it could be considered stolen, here, now." Wesley looked at the officer as if he were trying to figure out how far she was going with her baseless speculation. No anger. No panic. Just a stare, coolly calm, as if he had seen this too many times to be surprised. This car could be stolen. Her words were as simple as the weather, an undeniable fact. As if she hadn't just suggested he was a thief, with no proof, no reason. Officer Doyle kept his cool. "If you look at the registration." "I'll confirm when backup arrives," she interrupted. Without waiting for another word, she stepped back from the car, her eyes never leaving his. Wesley sat still. Unmoving. He knew the game. And he knew that if he was next, a headline, a viral hashtag, a name added to the list, it would be because of one thing, someone like him, who looked like this, driving a Mercedes. Before he could say anything, a beam of light swept across the car. Backup was coming. Headlights from the second patrol car were aimed straight in, ice-white light stretching across the sidewalk. Doyle straightened, as if her shoulders were a newly erected fence. Another officer stepped out. Patrick Harris. 30-something. High-cut hair, square jaw, an impatient look as if he had been waiting all day to act. "Situation, suspected stolen vehicle," Doyle reported quickly. But Harris wasn't looking at the car. He was looking at Wesley. Not the registration. Not the license plate. Not anything about the Mercedes. It was a black man in a suit, behind the wheel of something that was too good for him. That was enough. Wesley knew. He'd seen it. He'd advocated for those who had been swallowed by it. And now, he was the target. Get out of the car. Doyle repeated, her hand hovering near her holster this time. Wesley took a deep breath, keeping her composure as if her life depended on it. Officer, I'm cooperating. You have my papers. ID, registration. Just run the system, you'll see this car is in my name, perfectly legal. Doyle's lips pressed together. She didn't need the system. She didn't need the truth. She'd had Wesley figured out from the first glance. Get out of the car. He reached for the door handle slowly, not quickly, not abruptly. The other hand was still clearly on the wheel, deliberately exposed. Not a single wrong move. Wesley had stood in courtrooms where justice was argued over every word. He had exposed unjust stops, exposed prejudice, won back rights for people like him. But this time, it wasn't anyone else. It was him, in the glare of patrol lights, where truth could be distorted by fear and color. And Wesley knew, the next chapter could be written in ink, or in blood. He stepped out, straight, with a firm step. Wesley Gaines did not run. Did not flinch. Did not hide. As soon as his polished shoes hit the pavement, a rough hand closed around his wrist, yanking him back. Doyle. A dry, hollow laugh, as if caught in Wesley's throat, and then gone. He turned, slowly, as if he were the one controlling time. He had nothing to hide. No crime had been committed. No arrests, no excuses. He was just a man getting out of his own car. Wesley straightened his shoulders, his bearing unwavering, as if he were still on the bench. He looked at Doyle, unshaken, unmoved. I am Judge Wesley Gaines. I am not resisting. I am asking, what are you detaining me for? Doyle clenched his jaw. A tiny movement, but it said it all. She hadn't expected it, hadn't expected him to speak, to be so calm. She gritted her teeth, almost pushing back her own trembling. Because I said so. Wesley looked at her, his gaze locked, not aggressive, but heavy. He had spent his life mastering his emotions. In the courtroom, emotion was a double-edged sword. He had cut it with reason. But now, logic was no shield. Harris took a step forward. His fingers twitched, inches from his belt. The slightest movement was enough to set things off. Even as a judge, Harris muttered, "You're not privileged." Wesley's breathing deepened, slowed. He wasn't seeking privilege. He was asking for the bare minimum, kindness. At that moment, Doyle's radio went off. A short hiss. She flinched. Call center, status. She hesitated. What did she have to report? No carjacking. No warrant. No justification. Just, intuition. Bias. Default suspicion. Instead of admitting his mistake, Doyle turned. Put your hands behind your back. The pulse in Wesley's ears was pounding like a drum. He knew, this moment would stay with him forever. And when he thought it couldn't get any worse. Another car pulled up. The door opened. A man stepped out, steady, composed. Not like Doyle or Harris. Sergeant Luis Ramirez. His black boots clicked on the pavement, steady and deliberate. His uniform was neat, his build was rugged, his gray hair reflected the years, a man who had seen more than he cared to. He didn't rush. He didn't threaten. He observed. The sharp eyes moved to Wesley, the man was trying to keep his cool. Then to Doyle, his expression was tense, his hand still near the gun. Finally to Harris, his fingers were still restless. What's going on here? Ramirez's voice was low, but as heavy as a hammer. No one dared not answer. Doyle stood up straight, as if to reinforce his authority. Vehicle may be stolen. Driver refuses to comply. Ramirez did not respond immediately. His brow furrowed slightly. Driver. He repeated slowly, then almost as if a thought had struck him. His gaze dropped. He looked at the identification card Doyle still clutched. And in that instant, his entire posture changed. He blinked once, slowly, as if he were suppressing something that was about to explode. His jaw clenched, the muscles of his face tensed as his gaze shifted from Wesley to Doyle, then back to Wesley as if seeking confirmation of the unbelievable. "This is Judge Wesley Gaines," he said. His voice was not loud, not harsh, but it had the weight of a sledgehammer hitting concrete. Doyle shivered involuntarily. A chill ran down her spine. Doubt flashed across Harris's face, just a moment, and then vanished as if it had never been there. But Doyle stood still, unblinking. Things were spiraling out of control, and she knew it. But letting go? No, not yet. The truth was the truth, though. Ramirez interrupted, not with words but with a long, slow, icy stare. He shook his head, a clear gesture, no. Then he turned completely away from Doyle, his gaze fixed on Wesley. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft, as if calming a storm. Wesley let out a long breath, trying to stay calm, but his patience was wearing thin. "Sergeant," he said, each word pronounced, "I followed all instructions. Gave her the paperwork. And your officer refused to check it. She called for backup instead of handling a simple situation. She made things unnecessarily dramatic." Ramirez's nostrils flared. He turned, facing Doyle this time. "Have you run his plates?" he asked, his voice urgent and urgent. Doyle hesitated. Just a slow beat, but it was enough. Ramirez needed nothing more. He snatched the registration from her hand, hooked the radio from his belt. "Ramirez," he said, running a license plate check on a black Mercedes. The system responded almost instantly. "No theft report. Owner, Wesley Gaines. Judge. No mistake, no ambiguity." Silence fell. A painfully tense silence. Ramirez turned slowly to Doyle, his words cutting like knives. "This information, you had it. And yet you still escalated it. Do you hear what you're doing?" His voice was low, but sharp and echoed in the darkness like a death knell. Doyle pursed her lips, her features hardening. "I was just cautious," she said softly, barely audible. "No," Ramirez interrupted, this time without reserve, "you took a risk." Doyle still wouldn't back down. She had gone too far, and there was no turning back now, no admitting her mistake. "Just because he's a judge doesn't mean he can't be shady," she muttered, but with less certainty. Wesley looked at her, his eyes piercing deep into her soul. "Shady, for what?" he whispered. His breath was long, his fingers curling into fists. Ramirez glanced at him, her face heavy, not with anger, but with something like regret. "I'm sorry, Judge Gaines," he said softly. "This shouldn't have happened." But it did. Doyle stood there, frozen as a stone. Still refusing to say a word of apology. Would she face the consequences, or would the system fold in on itself again, closing in on itself? Wesley stood there, his jaw clenched as if to crush the anger boiling in his chest. His heart was steadfast, but heavy with a deep disappointment. He had spent his life upholding the law, believing in justice, believing that the system, however imperfect, would correct itself, purify itself. And now he, a respected judge, was the one being humiliated, the one being scrutinized, treated like an anonymous suspect. Sergeant Ramirez, his voice calm but firm, made his case. Doyle was wrong. Obviously. But she refused to admit it. "Just doing her job," Doyle replied. Her voice had lost its edge, becoming a dry echo of defense. She crossed her arms and held her head high, as if pride were more important than the truth. How do I know who he is? She said. Ramirez stared at her, his eyes piercing her arrogance. You don't need to know who he is, he said. You just need to follow the procedure. But you didn't. Doyle still didn't look at Wesley. She had never looked directly at him. No apology, no sign of remorse. Wesley, in that moment, summoned up all the patience he had left. Officer Doyle, he said, his voice low but firm. I want to hear it from you. Do you really believe you had a valid reason to stop me? There was a pause. Doyle's throat moved, as if she were about to say something, but nothing came out. Because there was nothing to defend. The only reason she stopped him was because. In her mind, a black man in a luxury car was something out of place, something that didn't belong. And now, Ramirez stood there, his eyes heavy. He knew. She knew. But no one said anything. Ramirez sighed, shook his head, and turned to Wesley. Judge Gaines, you're free to leave. Free. The word was ironic. Free to leave, as if he'd been legally detained. Wesley reached for the car door, but then, something stopped him. For decades on the bench, he'd sentenced cops who'd done wrong, exposed racism hidden behind badges. And now, when he was the victim, could he just turn away and pretend it never happened? No. No. He turned. Ramirez blinked, surprised. Wesley spoke, his voice firm, unwavering. I will not let this go. I will file a formal complaint. Officer Doyle abused his authority tonight. Doyle's head whipped around, as if pulled by an invisible string. Her cheeks flushed, but not with embarrassment, with anger. Wesley almost laughed, but he kept his composure. He tilted his head, his voice low and steady as rock. I am a judge. When I say something, I have my reasons. Ramirez nodded, slowly but with weight. That is your right, he said, his eyes never leaving Doyle. But you will be held accountable for what you have done. For the first time, Doyle paused. The invincible confidence was gone. She had been protected, had been in a safe zone. But now? Who would protect her? The question hung in the air. And Wesley, with his soul-piercing eyes, would not go without an answer. Doyle forced herself upright, her expression as stiff as a cracked mask. But there was something in her eyes, a twinge. Uncertainty. Fear, maybe. She had always shied away from moments like this. A few words of wisdom, a well-timed nod, and things would have passed quietly. But this time, it was different. Ramirez opened her notebook, her expression as hard as stone. Officer Doyle, I need you to state why you stopped that car. She straightened as if she were putting on her armor. I said it, suspicious behavior. Ramirez narrowed her eyes. And what behavior is suspicious? Just a second. A moment of hesitation, but enough. Wesley caught it. He saw the quick deliberation, a piece of reason pulled hastily from memory. No specific reason. No evidence. Only quiet panic, revealed in silence. No, Ramirez said, short and sharp as a knife. Doyle clenched his hands into fists. That's ridiculous, she muttered. We really let people like him threaten us? No one answered. But Wesley heard it clearly. People like him. Ramirez took a step forward, very slowly, very firmly. Say it again, he said softly, but his eyes were like fire. Doyle stiffened. She closed her mouth, her jaw as tense as a string about to snap. Wesley let out a long, heavy breath. There was no regret in her. No apology. No confession. She didn't regret doing wrong. She only regretted being found out. Ramirez turned to Wesley, her eyes burning with loyalty. I'll make sure this is documented, sir. Wesley nodded, slowly. But that wasn't enough. I want to talk to your captain. Tonight. Doyle was panicking. Her face was white. Ramirez didn't say a word, just reached for the comm. Connect me to Captain Emerson. We have an emergency. A beat of silence. The air was drained of sound. Are you really doing this? Doyle shouted, her voice tight, shaking like a string stretched to its limit. Her chest heaved, her breathing quickened. The mask of calm that had always adorned her face was now cracked, falling to pieces. Wesley stood there, unmoving. His face was strangely calm, like a rock in a sandstorm. If I don't do it, who will? He replied, each word pounding into the ground. There was no room for silence this time, no room for evasion. The system had to look in the mirror. It had to answer for itself. But the test wasn't tonight. The real test was later. On the way home, everything looked the same, familiar streets, the flashing city lights reflected on the windshield. But in the car, he was no longer the Wesley he had been that morning. Not the man who had walked out of the courthouse, trusting in justice, in the law, in the naive belief that if he stayed on the right path, the system would protect him. Tonight had torn that apart. He pulled into the driveway, turned off the engine, but didn't get out. Just sat there. Silent. It felt like the weight of the world was on his shoulders. Doyle, would she face the consequences? Or be reassigned to another precinct, given some sensitivity training, and continue on her unchecked path to power? Wesley had seen this too many times. But this time, his name was on the complaint. He was no longer an outsider. His title was now a reason to force the system to confront itself. And it made him sick. Because what if he wasn't a judge? What if he was just a regular black man, getting off work, driving home? No badge. No title. No privileges. Would he be arrested? Throw him to the ground? Worse? The thought tightened his fingers around the wheel, crushing the plastic and leather. This wasn't just about him. This was about every other black man. Who didn't have a Sergeant Ramirez to intervene? Who didn't have someone to protect their dignity from being trampled on the cold pavement? His mind drifted back to Doyle. Her arrogance. Her defiance. The way she refused to admit she was wrong, as if apologizing were a form of weakness. But this wasn't just about one cop. This was about a culture. A system. A beast that only backed away when pushed into a corner. And tomorrow, you're going to be the one pushing. You're not just filing a complaint. You're going to demand answers. You're going to demand transparency. You're going to demand consequences. You're going to demand change. Because if even a judge can be treated like this, the system is rotten to the core. What does this mean to everyone else? He let out a long sigh and shook his head. The battle isn't over, it's only just begun. And this time, he's not just wearing the robe of a judge. He stands now as a man demanding justice. If you believe in accountability, if you believe this story matters, then raise your voice. Let it be heard. Share this. Speak up. Change begins the moment we refuse to stay silent.